what's up everybody, this is Muth24, and this is a revisit to an old series that I did a long time ago. Haven't had an episode out in quite a while. This is my Video Game Versus series, and I've decided to take a look at the 5th generation of Pokemon games. Now, I don't own all of the games in the series, but I do own one from the first set and then one from the sequel games. I am planning to bring back more episodes of this series, and future episodes will actually have gameplay footage, as was suggested by a number of people during the first few episodes that I did. I'm unable to do that with this because I don't have any sort of capture device for the DS or the 3DS, so you're going to have to bear with me just looking at the cases and the guide for Black 2 and White 2 here for the time being. But basically, when I got back into the Pokemon games, it had been a long time since I had played them. It was Gold and Silver were the last two games that I had played up until the time I got Soul Silver. So it was the remake for the DS, and I really enjoyed it, and I specifically chose that version because I wanted to jump into White, but I also didn't want to jump in without knowing what I was getting myself into. I had not played the games in years, so I wanted to refamiliarize myself not only with the basic mechanics of the games, but also the new DS playstyle. And I had heard just great things about Black and White. So when I jumped into White version, I was familiar with the gameplay and all that. There were lots of new Pokemon that I hadn't seen before, but it was kind of nice at the same time because White version and Black version give you access to the original, or not the original 151, sorry, the 150 that are new to Black and White. And so you sort of have this return to the basic premise of Red and Blue, where you have a limited pool to work with, but there's plenty of variation there, and you are able to get the older Pokemon later on after the post-game stuff, but it both grants you a lot of freedom to do what you want in building your team, as well as kind of forces you to strategize. And so I ended up using kind of the core team that I had used for a long time. I had an electric type, I had a fire type, I had a water type, and then I mixed it up a little bit just because it was new territory. So I got myself an ice type, and I got a I believe there was a steel type in there somewhere. But it was just, I tried to do a little bit of old and a little bit of new. And then, as I progressed through the game, I found that there was so much more to do than in the older games. The routes were a lot longer, but there was also more to them. It didn't feel like it was just like, oh, this is just a longer path that I'm taking. No. There were extra things to do there. There were like more people to talk to, more buildings to enter, more items to find, and it was just really rewarding and more of an adventure spirit about it than some of the other games that I had heard people complain about. I know Gen 4 is often cited as being the weakest link in the series. Not to say that it's necessarily bad, but I know a lot of people aren't as hot on it as they are Gens 1, 2, 3, and even 5. So I just really liked the way that they presented everything. There were optional areas that you didn't have to do, but you could go explore and grind for experience points and save them up for later on and give yourself an edge against the next gym leader. The one thing that I did find really strange about Black and White, though, were how the gyms were staggered in terms of their difficulty. The first couple aren't terribly challenging. They're decent little hurdles to get over to start the game, but nothing beyond what you should be capable of doing there. When you get to Nimbasa City and Alace's gym, the electric one, it's not so much challenging as it is frustrating because her Emolga has this move called Volt Tackle, where it will just spam that over and over, and she actually, I believe, has 2 of them in Black and White, and they'll just keep alternating that back and forth. And even if you're not using a water type or something that's weak to electricity, there's still this frustration of she's just kind of like keeping this routine up and then healing them, and there's no real strategy to her approach. It's just, I'm going to spam this move over and over. And it felt kind of cheap, to be honest. I overcame it in my second try on the gym, but it was still just frustrating that there wasn't that much strategy put into her fight. Meanwhile, the rest of them I thought were great, but they also got to be progressively easier, which is strange because usually in a Pokemon game you want them to become more and more challenging as you go on. Not that they're flat out aggravating, but that they are harder by nature. So I thought it was really strange, and maybe this was because I had an ice type at my disposal. It may have played a bigger factor than I realized. But the dragon type gym at the end I found to actually be the easiest gym of the bunch. Now, when it comes to the Elite Four, I thought this was possibly the best Elite Four in any of the games ever. And now that said, I haven't played the Gen 3 games improper, but I know which Elite Four members, use what Pokemon more or less in each generation. So I started off with Gen 2. That was the first one that I played. And while I thought that the Elite Four was good, I didn't think it was quite perfect. Here I just thought it was fantastic. The fact that you have the freedom to go to whichever one first that you want is brilliant, and I hope they implement that in every game from here on out, unless there's some strategic reason that they don't, in which case it'd be interesting to see how they handle that. But the fact that you have this freedom to go from the center of the Elite Four area, if you will, and face off whichever one you want, really allows you to pick and choose your battles. So say you have a really good fighting type, you can take out Grimsley's dark types pretty easily, but maybe you're not so confident in your ability to take out Caitlyn's psychic types right off the bat. You can save that for last. I also thought that the end game sort of plot twist was pretty cool, where instead of fighting the champion, you have the whole Team Plasma story come to a head, and then the actual champion battle was saved for after the main game, which I thought was a really interesting, different way to do things. So as for the gameplay mechanics, the battle system, it does look pixelated, all the Pokemon models and all that, but it just, the way that they move, and it seems much more dynamic and lifelike and just lively in general, I just thought was great. It's this very much meeting of new and old, bringing back the spirit of the earlier games and the obviously more advanced technology of very late DS capabilities. And I really do feel like they pushed the DS to its limits with the Generation 5 Pokemon games. So then when it came to the sequel, it was the first time they had done a direct sequel in 2 entries instead of doing a compilation game. Because I know Platinum and Emerald have extra elements that the previous games did not, and Crystal does to a little bit lesser extent. But Black 2 and White 2 were actually set 2 years after the events of Black and White. Now, I got Black 2 because of the types that were in it. Technically speaking, White 2 is the sequel to White version, and Black 2 is the sequel to Black version. There's story elements that sort of carry over, but it's one of those cases where when you're playing White version, they'll mention Zekrom as the legendary that you're going to get, and in Black version, they'll mention it as Reshiram. It's the same thing in Black 2 and White 2. They'll keep referencing, like, oh, Reshiram was a legendary from the past game, or Zekrom was a legendary from the past game. It's just, they'll replace certain words in the text box. It's nothing really that drastic different between the two. As far as jumping into Black 2 was concerned, I wanted to do some really different stuff when I played it. And so I used bug types, I used fighting types, I used hybrids, or dual types rather, that I just had not used otherwise, and probably wouldn't use otherwise. And as far as a sequel game goes, it does sort of assume that you know the basics of Black and White. You don't have to know everything about it, which is really nice for someone who's jumping in with Black 2 and hasn't played the original. But they do go over the basics of, okay, Team Plasma was here, they kind of upset the status quo in Unova, then they were beaten, disbanded, some of them reformed to create this new, like, sort of, I don't know, SWAT team pirate look that they have in the second game, whereas some of the people who left Team Plasma have sort of renounced their former ways. Also, N is back in Black 2 and White 2, but he's not nearly as important as he was in White and Black. A lot of the characters who were important, the gym leaders and such, they're back, but not all of them keep their respective roles. The gym in Icarus City is closed, basically. There's a couple different gym leaders in place of some of the old ones that were around. And it makes for an interesting experience that is different and yet familiar. You'll still have your bug gym, you'll still have your ground gym, you'll still have your normal type gym, even though that one's helmed by a different gym leader. But then you'll have a water gym, you'll have a poison gym, and it's just cool the way that they mix things up a little bit there. So you don't have to expect anything drastically different out of the gameplay, though some of the gyms are significantly longer than they were in the first game. The ground-type gym being a prime example, it's probably double the length it was in the first game. And I think because I had experienced it once through, the Elite Four didn't feel quite as impactful or resonating at the end of Black 2 as the first time around. I will say, though, that the champion battle with Iris at the end of Black 2 and White 2 is possibly the single most fun trainer battle in any of the Pokemon games ever. It's just a blast to play through. Is it challenging? Yeah, and that's one thing I noticed in Soul Silver with the Red battle, is that one's really tough, and you feel like you have to put a lot of work into grinding to get to it. Whereas with Black 2 and White 2, if you use the same handful of Pokemon throughout the entire game, and even if you rotate a few out to your box, or if you just stick with a core team of 6, by the end of the game you're going to be in like mid 80 levels if you max out like everything. You go through all the main game stuff, you do the post game stuff. You're going to be mid 80s to maybe 90s depending on how much you spend in the post game content and how much you grind on the different routes. Which is pretty impressive, because most Pokemon games you'll get to like level 60 or 70 maybe by the end if you stick with a core team of 6. So it was really cool that they went to that extra step and decided, hey, there are some people who have trouble after the main game ends getting to that point where it doesn't feel like it's a chore. Because that's one thing I felt like with Soul Silver, and even after the end of White version a little bit, like training my team to get to the Elite Four rematch, you have to spend a lot of time kind of grinding and running in circles a little bit, which is fine for the extra challenge, but it's much better when it doesn't feel like it's actual work. Also, the post-game content in Black 2 is incredible. There's a ton of stuff packed in there, from finding legendaries that are not just from Gen 5. You get some Gen 3 and Gen 4 legendaries in there. There are shinies designed in the game's coding that you can get. You can get a shiny Dragonair in White 2. You can get a shiny Garchomp in Black 2. And then both games, assuming you have 100% of the Pokedex, you can go to this nature reserve and get a shiny Haxorus, which is really cool that they went ahead and put these in there as Pokemon that you can just catch, at your own discretion, instead of having to try and manipulate the game with all the EV training and all that extra science that some people just aren't willing to put the time in for, or don't really want to, sit down and try and understand all the textbook science to it. Which is me personally. Like I think the EV training stuff is interesting, but I don't understand it personally. I don't really intend to. I catch the Pokemon I like. I use the ones I like. If I come across a shiny, cool. But I don't really need one to build my team. Also, you have the Pokemon World Tournament in Black 2 and White 2, which is a brilliant culmination of all the things Pokemon has been over the years. You have the gym leaders from every previous region. You have all the champions from the previous regions, and you can face them in a bracket tournament, either as the entirety of the Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, and Unova region, or as the entirety of like the Psychic types, the Electric types, the Water type gym leaders, and so on and so forth for the different specific types. Which is just, I think, a really neat idea that they just put that in there in the first place, but also give you freedom to tackle it how you want to. As you progress through it, you open up more and more options. That said, it's really challenging, but it's really rewarding when you do beat, say, the leaders of the Sinnoh region or the Hoenn region or whatever, because it feels like they're rewarding you for making a very diverse, very adaptable team to take on leaders that you would normally take on, in a certain order, but this time you're taking them all at once. So you sort of have to have a few Pokemon that are jack-of-all-trades type Pokemon. They have to be highly adaptable, highly versatile for the different scenarios that are going to be thrown your way. So with all that in mind, which is the game I would recommend more highly? Well, Black 2 and White 2 are the more complete experience. There's just so much more to do in them. There's this whole sense of rewarding the player for trying new things and going past the main game and exploring the post-game to every corner of the post-game. Whereas White version, the post-game is still very good. It just is lacking a lot of the really cool features that Black 2 and White 2 implemented. That said, the experience of this being new, the experience of this being fresh, I think comes across better in White and Black. mainly because you don't have any Pokemon outside the Unova region Pokedex until after the main game. In Black 2 and White 2, you have the ability to catch certain Pokemon, like Lucario, or your Flaffies and Ampharos, or a Marill and Azumarill, and so on and so forth from previous generations. Which, while they can be fun, while they can be interesting to add to your team, doesn't force the balance of strategy with freedom as much as the first game does. Like, there's certainly a lot more freedom in Black 2 and White 2, but I didn't feel like the strategizing your team aspect came across quite as strongly. And like I mentioned, that does have to go with the whole idea of returning to the red and blue formula of, here's 150 Pokemon, figure out what works best for you. It's very much a trial and error process in White and Black, jumping straight into it as something brand new, but that's, I think, what works so well for it. As I mentioned as well, the gym leaders in the Elite Four don't feel quite as strikingly original when you play White version or Black version and then follow it up with White 2 or Black 2. If you're just jumping into Black 2 and White 2, you shouldn't have a problem following the game or the story. They do make plenty of references to what's going on. They give you plenty of context over the course of the 30-something hours it takes to play through the main game. But I think that you're really going to appreciate Black 2 and White 2 more if you have played the first two games. Or first games, rather. One of the first games. So, with that in mind, while these are both fantastic games, and I just honestly love them, they're some of my favorite DS games ever, I have to give the slight edge to Pokemon Black and White. I really do think it, obviously defined the Generation 5 experience, but it also brought in this whole aspect of, here's something old and something new, and we're going to blend it together and just create something great out of it. It's a lot of fun to play through, something that the past Pokemon games had gotten into was a lot of just more serious technical stuff, and while that's all fine and good, when you do too much of that, it sort of detracts from the fun factor, just the overall enjoyable experience that you can have with these games. And to that end, I think Pokemon Black and White are some of just the plain most fun games I've ever played on a handheld. The series as a whole, I think, is just really fun and upbeat, and it really, as terms of just happiness, if you will, in a game, I think the only one that really trumps it is the Kirby games, because those are just, happy-go-lucky all the time. But either way, I think these are great games. So if you were to jump in with Black 2 and White 2 without having played Black and White, I don't think you'd be disappointed at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. I think that whether you played the first game or the second games in this series, you're going to have a really fun time with them. That said, I am going to have to give the slight edge to Black and White version over Black 2 and White 2 because they really defined the experience of the Generation 5 games. So that pretty much wraps up this review, and with that, I will see you guys on the next episode of Video Game Versus.